Hello, everyone. I'm Karl Andrus from the Hamilton Community Benefits Network. I have with me Kumsa Baker from the Toronto Benefits Network. We're here today to chat about Hamilton's LRT project, community benefits, and the experience the Toronto Community Benefits Network and its residents had in fighting for community benefits on their two light rail projects, the Eglinton Crosstown and the Finch West LRT. Now, before we begin, I'm just going to start with a land acknowledgement, so bear with me, please. We are grateful to be residing on the traditional lands of the Huron, Wendat, Anishinaabe, Kiowa, the Haudenosaunee, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The land is governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum. This is a historic pre-contact wampum, part of a great piece of the Haudenosaunee Confederation. And there was an agreement with the Anishinaabe to act and be stewards of the land and its resources. The bowl, which was originally represented by the beaver tail, represents the lands of the Great Lakes Basin. It includes all of its water, plants, animals, and various people. Through the Great Peace, all of the Haudenosaunee weapons were buried under the Tree of Peace. The wampum invites us to intentionally put down weapons, harsh words, or uncaring hearts, and to come to the bowl with a spoon and other tools with no sharp edges, to feed ourselves and others. The Dish with One Spoon Wampum says we must take care of the land and ensure that there is always food left in the bowl for generations. Another important wampum that covers this territory is the two-row wampum. This was made between the Haudenosaunee Confederation and the Dutch. The two-row wampum represents distinct nations of the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch. Each row runs parallel to the other, never crossing paths. The two-row wampum signified that the two distinct nations could continue their cultural traditions alongside each other without forcing each nation to be assimilated by the other. Both of these wampums tell us that Indigenous people on this land were committed to peace with other nations and to honor each other's self-identity. We further acknowledge that the land on which Hamilton was settled is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. It is important for us to honor this truth and acknowledge the ongoing genocide of Indigenous people in Canada. We gather today on stolen land and at the displacement of Indigenous people. Living in this territory makes all peoples in Hamilton treaty peoples, those who come as settlers, immigrants of this generation or earlier generations, as well as those brought involuntarily as the result of the transatlantic slave trade and imperialism. As we write and gather here today, we live in the contradictions of being treaty people in the midst of broken treaties and persistent inaction and idling. We commit to searching for the right words, thoughts, hearts, and actions to align ourselves with Indigenous rights and self-determination. Now, I'm going to start quickly, everyone who's joined us, to take a few minutes and just go through a little bit about the HCBN. And I'm going to have Kumsa give you a little bit of background on the TCBN, and then we'll dive right into our topic of the day. So just bear with me for one moment here. So I want to talk a little bit about what the Hamilton Community Benefits Network is. For those that don't know, it's a collective made up of representatives from Acorn Hamilton, the Hamilton Brantford Building Trades, the Immigrant Working Center, the Hamilton District Labor Council, CA, Hamilton Food Share, Environment Hamilton, and many other unions and organizations that envision an inclusive, thriving city in which all residents have equitable opportunity to contribute to the building of healthy communities and prospering economies. Before you are a list of logos of members and partners of the HCBN, and I want to acknowledge that both this video and the work the HCBN does is graciously paid for by donations from the Hamilton Community Foundation and Atkinson Foundation. The HCBN began very early on in response to the opportunities, many of which we're going to talk about today, of the Hamilton Light Rail project when the previous government announced $1 billion in capital funding for the Hamilton Light Rail project. At that time, they also passed Bill C-6, which actually mandated that there must be some form of community benefits projects with their infrastructure, major infrastructure projects in the province of Ontario. We're going to talk about some community benefits that have been gained by the TCBN today and their light rail project. But the Hamilton Community Benefits Network was really a labor community alliance that was built to make sure that we extracted the maximum benefits for the city of Hamilton and Hamilton residents. We created a foundation document that you can find on our website that outlined the principles of the HCBN. And then we started our work with Metrolinx back in March 2017. 2017, Metrolinx formally acknowledged that they wanted to develop a community benefits framework for the Hamilton Light Rail project that included employment opportunities, that included local procurement options, and they made a solid commitment with the Hamilton Community Benefits Network and community partners to formalize a community benefits agreement along the line of the Eglinton Crosstown, which is why our guest is so important today to talk to us about what happened in the city of Toronto. I'm just going to quickly go through what a community benefits agreement is. A community benefit agreement is founded on shared legally binding commitments between the government, the contracting firm, and the community to build and complete public infrastructure projects through an effective, transparent, fair, and inclusive process that supports good jobs and prevailing industry standards. Community benefits are becoming increasingly popular in Ontario, particularly with the strategic use of community benefits agreements. They are used to ensure that effective residents will share in the benefits of major development projects. Through CBAs, community identified priorities and needs can be addressed, prompting a more equitable and healthier community. CBAs can provide a range of advantages to communities, included but not limited to local employment opportunities, job training, job fairs, green spaces. But they require community buy-in, resident engagement, and input. So some of the early successes that the Hamilton Community was able to get. We worked with the Chamber of Commerce to support their business in the LRT Ready series, which was a chamber-supported community benefit. We worked with the community connectors and Metrolinx to make sure that residents were being engaged through the community connector project. We hosted a series of community conversations, which may come up in this conversation, to generate resident requests. We put detailed input into Metrolinx on some station design, including green architecture LEED standards. We talked extensively about the need in Hamilton for a community hub space, possibly at the storage and maintenance facilities. There was conversations about adding water fountains to LRT stops. We, of course, demanded a replacement of twice as much affordable housing as was lost during construction, and the previous government budgeted $5.8 million to replace that lost affordable housing. We also had discussions about pop-up parks, temporary public space on demolished buildings, and ran a community corridor art project, which was to be the beginning of a pile of art projects across the line to help animate the LRT space. So these are some of the core demands that came out of that community conversation, and this is one of our community conversation events that was held at the public area. Kumsa might remember, as he was there with us way back in January 16th of 2019, and some emerged from that, including the need for affordable housing, equitable employment opportunities, mobility, justice, and environmental concerns. And we're going to hopefully get into some of those demands and what Toronto was able to realize in our conversation today with Kumsa. Kumsa, if you can maybe give us a few minutes to introduce yourself and your work with the TCBN and your organization.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Karl. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon and to share a little bit more about the work of the Toronto Community Benefits Network. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. Can you see the screen?
Just a second here. I'm just sharing that now for you. Go ahead.
Okay, awesome. And so, yeah, my name is Clemson Becker. I'm the campaigns director with the Toronto Community Benefits Network. I'm going to be going through a short presentation, giving you a little bit more information about the work that we have done in Toronto and our experiences related to transit development with two projects that are currently in implementation here in Toronto. A little bit about the Toronto Community Benefits Network. We are a community labor coalition, and so we were founded in 2014. Our coalition is comprised of community groups, community organizations, local service providers and agencies, social enterprises, as well as labor groups and organizations. And so we were founded in 2014, and we focus on supporting 6 target groups. So this includes youth, women, Indigenous, racialized people, veterans, and newcomers. Our goal is to advocate for and negotiate community benefit agreements. And we want to ensure that equitable opportunities and community benefits for the community through investment in infrastructure and urban development. Obviously, in Toronto, we have lots of development happening, both on the public and private side. And so we see immense opportunities to really ensure that through community benefits agreements that we get strong commitments to things like apprenticeships, professional, administrative, and technical jobs and opportunities, things like social procurement, as well as things like neighborhood improvements and environmental protections. In Toronto, CBAs can help to accomplish a wide range of things, including good jobs and economic opportunities through requirements for local and equity hiring. Also things like access to apprenticeships and training programs, opportunities for local suppliers, diverse-owned businesses, and social enterprises to be supported through social procurement. We also see lots of investments in things like community amenities, recreation and or park spaces, things like community services, facilities, and childcare centers, affordable housing, environmental protections, and most importantly, accountability and transparency within the development process. In terms of how we see community benefits as it relates to development, you'll see here on the right side sort of the traditional way of development, whereas community groups or organizations or neighborhood groups or activists within the community who have concerns, our direct relationship is engaging with the government. And so a lot of times, those issues are brought forward to the government, and the hope is that the government will act on behalf of the community to address some of those concerns or interests or issues. But on the left side, what we've been trying to advocate for is for a seat at the table for the community, right? So when it comes to these development processes, how can we ensure that the community is not just engaged with the government, but also with the developer and unions who also have immense power when it comes to how these projects are implemented? And by really shifting some of the power imbalances to actually have a seat at the table, it allows for the community to actually have a stake in actually being able to make an ask, make your demands, and bring those forward at the table, but also ensure that there's accountability within the process. And that can only be done by having a seat at the table. And so we use a wide range of advocacy strategies, to make sure that communities have a seat at the table when these type of projects and decisions are being made. I want to go into a little bit about the history of community benefits in Toronto. It actually started in the mid-2000s in an area called Rexdale near the Toronto airport. And it was a group that had formed called themselves Communities Organizing for Responsible Development. And this was in relation to a large-scale proposal that a U.S.-based company was interested in investing $1 billion into the Woodbine racetrack to convert it from a racetrack into a full casino and entertainment complex. And the community at the time, really got involved, as well as working with local unions to really, create a platform for advocacy to ensure that as these investments are being made in the community, that the impacts would be mitigated, but also that the community would see positive benefits from this investment project. Unfortunately, in 2012, the project had folded due to the financial crisis. But in 2017, the provincial government announced a new process for developing the Woodbine site. And so at the time, TCBN was formed into and merged with the Community Organizing for Responsible Development group to launch a Rexdale Rising campaign, which really pick up a lot of the demands that were put forward very early on through that community group to secure a community benefit agreement, which would include things like opportunities for apprenticeships, long-term operational positions, so 20% local hiring as well as 20% equity hiring, as well as social procurement. So having hard targets for social procurement to support local businesses, as well as social enterprises, and investments in things like childcare center. As we were doing a lot of our engagement with the community and the discussion around economic opportunities and jobs, one of the barriers that were really identified was the need for affordable childcare spaces. And so that became one of the key demands that were part of our ask to the city and to the developer to say that you need to make investments into a childcare center because it was a big need and priority within the community. And to get that investment from the developer to put in that $5 million to the city for the development of a new center in the local community. There are also a wide range of benefits when it comes to employment. So also ensuring that, you know, within the long-term opportunities that there's commitments to full-time jobs. And then also with the new facilities being built, also access for community into some of these spaces. And so one of the new facilities that they're building is a 3,500 seat performance facility. And so the community has developed a community access to space policy where they can get up to 10 events per year at free or no cost. And so this was really a marquee project here in Toronto that really helped to launch, you know, many of the other work that we're kind of involved in today, including the adoption of city policies related to community benefits. I'll probably go into a little bit more details related to the light rail transit projects that we've been involved in and in the Q&A with Karl in a few moments. But we've also been involved in the Eglinton Crosstown light rail transit project, which started in 2015 and is almost complete. And you know, there are a wide range of concerns, you know, from the community, especially around the environment. You know, whether it was related to the maintenance and storage facility and having a gas-powered backup generator, which created a lot of concerns for people within the community to have that sort of backup generator being emitting a lot of pollution within the community, and to also, you know, address some of those environmental concerns and to really leverage community advocacy to meet some of those, you know, key priorities. There was also the Kodak Building, which was built in 1939, which was really a historic but underused space within the community. And you know, the community was really interested in preserving, you know, this historic building and to actually leverage that into community use. And so after a lot of advocacy, Metrolinx was able to reconfigure their design and sort of a vision for this space to actually be the future station at Mount Dennis. And so what you're looking at is actually the future Mount Dennis station, where, you know, underground you can go down into and you can enter into the trains, and then the second and third floor are going to be used for community use, and so they're repurposing that space for community access and use in the future. We've also been involved with the Finch West Light Rail Transit Project, which was a $2.5 billion project, which was started in 2018. A lot of very similar commitments to apprenticeships, professional, administrative, and technical positions, social procurement. One of the big visions that people in the community had was for the need for community space, which was highlighted as a huge need within the community consultation process that we had engaged in. And there was actually a community group called Community Action Planning, the Community Action Planning Group, which was a group of local residents who were really interested in securing a community space or a community hub as part of this larger scale project. And they worked to identify, you know, where there could be, you know, lands that could be made available at free or low cost to the community for them to build out this vision. And so what you see here is actually an overview shot of the maintenance and storage facility land. So this is where Metrolinx is going to be hosting all of its trains overnight. They're going to be doing all the maintenance and cleaning of all their trains that will come in as part of the new Finch West LRT project. And you'll see right at the front of that sort of that green space is a section that the community had indicated its interest to use as a site for future community space or community hub, and to really work with the City of Toronto to ensure that, you know, as Metrolinx was completing its project on the site, that there would be a setback of 32 meters to allow for the community's vision to be realized. And so, you know, the community has really leveraged that commitment from Metrolinx to ensure that setback. You might have heard in the news just recently over the past year that the new government and Ford, you know, reneging on that commitment, and the community was got involved in the media, got the attention of local city councilors, of the government, and really leveraged, the community voice and advocacy to make sure that the commitment was followed through on. And so this is a rendering of the vision that the community has come forward with in terms of, really leveraging that 32-meter setback at the forefront of the maintenance and storage facility for a future community hub and center for the arts. We've also worked on a bunch of other projects and campaigns. I mentioned some of the policy work that we've been involved in. In 2017, the City of Toronto adopted the social procurement policy, which we were very active on. As well as in 2019, the City of Toronto adopted the Community Benefits Framework, which was part of a large advocacy effort that our network was involved in. And a lot of this policy work comes out of the poverty reduction strategy that the city had developed in 2015, and the city really identifying public infrastructure as a good way to ensure that there are good jobs in local communities. We've also been involved in other sort of public infrastructure projects, one including the West Park Healthcare Center, which was the project was finalized in 2019, and so they're in the early stages of development as part of that project, which includes community benefits. We've also been working with our local social housing provider, Toronto Community Housing, to ensure that there's community benefit agreements as part of its revitalization projects, including the one in Regent Park. We've also been active in engaging some of our anchor institutions like York University, who are leading on multiple different campus expansion projects, and also helping them to adopt social procurement policies and also implementing them as part of their various campus projects. And then at the federal level, this is something that's more recent, but we've also been very involved in some federal advocacy. As you know, the federal government has billions of dollars earmarked for infrastructure investments for public infrastructure over the next 10 years. And so we've been working with groups like the Hamilton Community Benefits Network and other networks across Ontario and Canada to ensure that we have a strong voice from community that our government's hearing from, to ensure that we have an inclusive recovery that includes community benefit agreements as part of that infrastructure investment rollout. In terms of our roadmap for success, we have a few key steps that we've identified in our work as being critical to ensuring strong outcomes for community benefit agreements. That includes a lot of community planning and research, identifying the opportunity in different projects, coalition building, identifying priorities and validation, communication and advocacy, negotiations, implementation, monitoring and evaluation, oversight and accountability. And in terms of how we win, we use a wide range of organizing strategies, whether it's related to communication, research, disruptive strategies, advocacy strategies, and peer learning strategies, all which are important to ensuring strong outcomes for community benefit agreements. I'll turn it back over to Karl.
Thank you for that information, Kumsa. Obviously, it's very detailed. I really appreciate it. So as you can know, the hot topic right now in Hamilton is our renewed light rail project, which has now got $3.4 billion in capital and long-term financing commitments from both the federal and provincial government, with a mandate from the federal government to make sure that community benefits and affordable housing are included in the light rail project. We also know that Metrolinx, and I don't know how this works compared to some of your other projects, had a significant 90 properties were required for our Hamilton LRT. As you know, it travels through the densest part of the city of Hamilton along our main King corridor, where it's the oldest part of the city, and there isn't a lot of wiggle room, so a lot of properties had to be allocated. We had some people that were displaced. So can you start by telling us a bit about your two LRT projects, the Eglinton Crosstown and Finch West LRT, and some of the CBA negotiations you guys undertook there?
Yeah, so in terms of the two projects, the Eglinton Crosstown LRT was developed in 2015. The proposal was brought forward. It's a $8 to $10 billion project. It started at $8 billion. I think they're now close to $10 billion in terms of some of the delays and cost overruns for the project. We've also been involved with the Finch West Light Rail Transit project, which was brought forward in 2019, which is a bit smaller at $2.5 billion. And we also have 4 new projects in planning and procurement currently in Toronto. The Eglinton Crosstown Lrt, which was brought forward in our, where the planning started in early 2010, 2011, but the project started in 2015. And this was kind of coincided with the launch of our network in TCBN in 2014 in preparation for this large-scale project. And so we had a huge role to play in terms of engaging with the community, engaging with the government, engaging with Metrolinx to ensure that, with this sort of significant investment, across many low-income communities in Toronto, that we, I think, mitigated the impacts, and concerned and really addressed some of the concerns and issues that, communities had related to the project. And then B, ensure that how do we ensure like really strong positive community benefits in the community, and so really leveraging our community engagement and discussions with residents and community members in those areas to really ensure that we were meeting some of their key needs and issues.
So can you tell us a little bit about what some of those key needs and issues that you heard from the residents along those corridors, or the businesses along those corridors, some of the concerns that were raised out of the gates, and how those conversations with Metrolinx went when you brought those concerns forward?
Yeah, I think like at the broader level, I think like folks were, in community were very adamant about the importance of good jobs. Given the large infrastructure investment, one of the early ideas that came forward was that, we want good jobs in our communities, right? Which was something that, we really, saw as, really being a huge challenge, rising inequality, within our communities, in Toronto. And so as part of that, piece, understanding that, a lot of these jobs are going to be good union jobs, communities really wanted to say that we want access to those jobs. And we know that historically there's been a huge underrepresentation of Indigenous, Black, racialized, women, youth, newcomers in the industry, and how do we make sure that through these public investments that we can actually create the opportunities for folks who who are really wanting to have good jobs in their local communities. And so I think at the core, I think was really the focus on how do we ensure good jobs, not only in the construction sector. I think like, there's a lot of sort of work within sort of the physical side of the infrastructure. And, you can be a carpenter, you can be an electrician, you can be a laborer, but also all the work that goes into the design, the financing, the operations, the maintenance. And so we also recognize that there were a lot of opportunities in those areas as well. Whether it was Metrolinx doing the hiring because they had to beef up their staff, or the new consortium that was coming in as a consortium needing to hire a lot of staff to help run the operations of this facility. And so we looked at and so we split those two areas into looking at apprenticeships as one area, and then professional, administrative, and technical positions to really make sure that we were addressing or creating good jobs on both sides of the construction sector. We also heard a lot of, I mentioned a little bit earlier, some examples related to neighborhood improvements. And so, because there was so much land that Metrolinx had under control, the community was really interested to see, like, how could some of that public land be brought back into community hands, or that the community can get their hands on. And this kind of coincided with sort of the consultations when we heard, like, the lack of community spaces within the Jane and Finch neighborhood. And it's interesting because the Finch Avenue, which goes east and west, is actually sort of a dividing point, within the Jane and Finch community, and there have been a lot of conflicts with folks who live on the north end of Finch and versus the south side of Finch, and so folks were also thinking about what could be a community space that can really bring both sides of Finch together, as a community space where folks can really value each other, but also a space which they can call their own, and something that could be community owned and community operated.
It's interesting you mentioned that northwest divide, because the key main artery that's been chosen for our LRT has a similar historic view in Hamilton of a division between the north and the south. I just want to cycle back to the opportunity, especially given light of COVID, to talk a little bit about the opportunity. We're told we're going to get 7,000 person-year jobs from the Hamilton Light Rail project, from the design, the construction, and then approximately 150 to 200 person-year jobs post completion in terms of the operation and maintenance of the jobs. Obviously your project started before COVID, so our project is looking in terms of a restart of a slowing COVID economy and providing opportunities for women and marginalized and Indigenous folks, especially those who've been hardest hit by COVID. So how successful were you in getting those people into those jobs right away? Was there any challenges that you faced? Any lessons that could be learned from the TCBN?
Yeah, I think in terms of the sort of employment pathway, I think that was something that we learned very early on, that it does need a lot of focus. It's one thing to get the commitment to provide or ensure that there are jobs for the local communities and equity seeking groups, but it's also very similarly a lot of work to really make sure that the employment pathways are being created so that people can go from, hey, I'm interested in a job, to actually working on site. Right, and so we really leveraged our network and our relationships with local agencies and service providers. Some who offer things like pre-apprenticeship training programs, or training supports, for people looking to get a job, and so really working with them to do outreach into the community to really help support with the employment pathways. To make sure that if folks were interested, that they had all the supports available, and also making sure that any barriers that folks may have faced as well, right? And we know that there may be barriers that people face, and making sure that support is available at the community level. Our goal is not to add costs to the development, which sometimes community benefits can be looked at as in terms of adding costs, and so any way from the community level that we can really help support with that employment pathway work, so that we have a list of ready to hire. I guess that's what I think the process that we had come up with was a ready to hire list. And so as people were coming through these training programs, we had a list of people who were ready to start on the job. And so we can work with the contractor, to identify these individuals and get them starting to work, and really leveraging our relationships with labor and the unions who are also supporting with the recruitment and placing people on these job sites.
That's really incredible to hear. I know we had some early success in negotiations with local employment services and, of course, the Hamilton Brantford building trades when we began the process. But it was early days. At that point, the RFP hadn't been issued, nor the RFQ, when we first started those conversations. So those are going to be important pieces to remember moving forward. I want to talk a little bit about the public space aspect, especially what happened with the Finch West LRT, where you actually made a massive community gain in terms of a community hub space, but then sort of had the rug pulled out from under you guys. And I wanted to hear what was needed to keep the government on track with that.
I would say for me, just being part of the process to see the commitment from a lot of residents and leaders within the community to stay active throughout this sort of the last almost 10 years now. The conversation around this community hub actually started early on during the planning stages, of this project in 2012. And so it's been close to 10 years now, and to see a lot of those residents and community leaders really continues to be involved, getting the commitment from the City of Toronto, to make sure that they were, supportive of the community's ask for this community hub. Getting the support from Metrolinx, which took a lot of advocacy to make sure that there was a setback, right? That, there would be that space available for the community, to actually, build their vision on, to, ensure that there was space for community throughout the procurement process, right? And that was something that TCBN was able to leverage our relationship with Metrolinx to say that, hey, the community should be able to get in front of all these bidders, on this project to share their vision, right? Because we know that Metrolinx has its vision, but how do we make sure that those who are going to be in the community's building, that they hear directly from the community in terms of what their vision is, and so being able to present, to all the final bidders before selection, was really powerful for community to say that, we were heard, our needs were heard, and to not only stop at sort of the commitment level, to actually build up the vision, right? And so, seeking funding, to think about governance, they came up with a design, by engaging with, community members, they started to think about starting to brainstorm the type of activities that they wanted to kind of, hold within this space and what that would look like. If the community wanted to own this type of space, what would be the process of governance to really, achieve that, and financing and funding all those pieces. And so when the rug was pulled under them, there was already so much work happening in the community that, it was just, a lot of people just really got out and really shared their story. I think because so many people were involved in the process already in building out the vision, people really felt this was personal, right? And, really, got involved, called their, local elected officials at all levels of government. They hosted a rally in the middle of the pandemic, as safe as they could have, to make sure that, their voices were heard, during this time. And I think it was only through that advocacy and really big push from community that they were able to continue along that path and really leverage that momentum that they had built over the past, 8-9 years, to really, pull together, all of those voices, community support, advocacy to, achieve that vision and to get that recommitment from the government for the land and to, to make sure that they were taken seriously and that, the folks would not back down from that commitment for a community hub.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And I really wanted to touch on that because community benefits, as you know, are very new to Hamilton. They've kind of had a rocky on again, off again start with our major community benefits project, the light rail project, being canceled twice, restarted, come back from the brink of death more times than I can count, especially in the last 15 years. So I really wanted people to hear that community benefits don't exist in the boardroom at a table, at a conference table with Metrolinx, that there has to be a broad consensus of community members and of residents who are going to fight for those gains, because I myself or other members from the HCBN can sit at Metrolinx and sit with the ministry and ask for everything we want. But if they don't think that there's a groundswell of people behind it who support those and who are in favor of those demands, and why I think it's really important to make sure that those voices are at least being raised at that table, but also that there's the action to stand behind that. So I thank you for sharing that story, because I really want people to know that although the HCBN exists and we were given a small seat at the table with Metrolinx, during the last project, we were told to lower our expectations on what the TCBN gained. And we were consistently told this by Metrolinx folks that, oh, the budget's a little bit different. Oh, we're not sure you're going to be able to get the same gains as the TCBN. So I want people who are listening to know that this is, that there's the negotiations in the boardroom portion, but there's also the fight on the street that is so important in having those community voices. So thank you for that. That kind of takes me into the next, talking a little bit about some of the other games. We've talked about workforce development. We've talked about activating community spaces and on community-owned land. Can you tell me a little bit about both professional, administrative, technical, and union apprentice jobs and hard targets for those? Can you tell me a little bit about social procurement and local business support, and maybe some of the gains that came out of your two projects for local businesses, especially racialized or women-owned businesses?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's something I think we've learned a lot in this area. I think over the past few years with both I would say most on the Eglinton than the Finch. We were able to get, a commitment. It wasn't a target, and so there isn't any specific number in terms of what they have to meet in terms of social procurement. But there was a commitment made to, trying to prioritize local businesses when it came to any opportunities for procurement. Metrolinx, and the contractor, does a lot of purchasing of the things like goods and services. And, what are the ways that we can make sure that, local businesses who are going to be most impacted by this project really benefit from some of those, purchasing of goods and services and opportunities. And so it's definitely been like a lot of learning. I think on Eglinton, they've been able to spend, I think, around $7 million from the last time they had updated in terms of supporting local businesses. There's also another reporting area around social enterprises. And so social enterprises are also an area of focus for the social procurement program. And they've spent, I think, close to just over $1 million in supporting social enterprises. We've definitely had to really push on this area to really make sure that Metrolinx and the contractor was meeting its obligations. Some of the things that we had to do was facilitate, procurement fairs, and so like specific events where we, connected with different groups that are engaged with different local businesses. We work closely with BIAs within a business improvement area. Organizations who represent a lot of businesses within the neighborhoods, to engage them and to make aware that these events are happening and that they can participate in these events. They were able to directly connect with Metrolinx as well as the contractors' procurement staff to share a little bit more about the businesses that and the goods and services that they offer. And to also hear from Metrolinx in terms of some of the and the contractor in terms of some of the purchasing that the needs that they would have over the course of the project. And so, I think that was very important to think about how do you create those spaces, right? Because you can't just leave it off to the contractor or Metrolinx to achieve that. It really has to be really working closely with community. And so TCBN really, helped to facilitate some of those spaces to really ensure that businesses in the community understood that these commitments have been made, and that Metrolinx and a contractor need to really engage and hear from those businesses directly, and really be in those spaces to really identify where there could be synergies and opportunities for alignment and contracts to be formed.
All right, that's good to know. So the other big key that I don't know that it came up very much, but is very important to, I guess, all of us, but specifically residents of Hamilton, and the federal government has made a specific reference to, and so recently did Metrolinx and the deputy minister at a recent presentation to City Council on affordable housing. As you may be aware, and I did mention, we have 90 full properties that were expropriated, well, not expropriated, were purchased under so far willing seller, willing buyer. There hasn't been an appropriation on the line yet. There's 60 purchased, another 30 to go, and then a bunch of property shaves. But there's some big chunks of land. Metrolinx had kind of, they're the largest landowner, private landowner in Hamilton right now. Wow. I don't know who that was, but they mentioned property costs around 150 million in property costs in some estimates. So I'm curious, did you guys have any conversations with Metrolinx or the City of Toronto on affordable housing from your project? Was there that scale of land acquirement required for either the Eglinton or the Finch Wests?
I would say at the time, no. Like Metrolinx has always said that their interest is transit building. So anything related to housing was always something that was shared as something that was out of scope, at least for Metrolinx. And so, but however, there has been work at I would say more at the community level. I wouldn't say this is a community benefits conversation, but more at the community level in terms of what would be prioritized for those lands that Metrolinx owns, right? And there could be a wide range of decisions that could be made in terms of leveraging that public land for the greater public good, or the other option in terms of for profit and private investment, right, and private profit, right. And so that's a conversation that's definitely happening at the local levels, across all these projects. Metrolinx does own a lot of land near some of the different subway stations that are being developed. and they have a program in terms of offloading that to the private sector, and to recoup some of that money. And so there is a concerted effort at the community level to really make sure that that the public priorities, the community priorities are being heard and implemented. And so I think that's a conversation that's probably going to come up, I think, in the upcoming months in terms of what that will look like, in terms of housing and the land and affordable housing and what that will look like. And so yeah, I think like that's kind of been the conversation so far. Like when it comes to community benefits, it's always been out of scope for Metrolinx. However, we've been engaged with the city as well as the province in terms of what will be prioritized for those lands, and really trying to make the case that things like affordable housing and other sort of public good things like community hubs and community spaces should be prioritized for those lands, especially if there's a huge community interest.
So just stepping back a little bit from light rail and Metrolinx, does Toronto have an inclusionary zoning bylaw? Have you guys had any success in talking about inclusionary zoning in your transit-oriented corridors like Eglinton or Finch West?
Yeah, so we're actually in the process of developing that bylaw. So there's been a huge consultation process that's happened over the past year or year and 2 years now, due to the pandemic. But there's been a big sort of focus, on wanting to ensure that there's deep affordability, when it comes to affordable housing. And also making sure that there are a wide range of options when it comes to affordability, whether it's really around rental housing or affordable home ownership. That's an area of conversation that's really emerged, in Toronto. As property is very expensive, and a lot of people have really been priced out from owning a home. And so thinking about things like, rent to own programs, that can actually make it affordable for people who are working and living in the city to be able to afford their own home. And then also, making sure that there's affordable housing, but a wide range of options when it comes to affordability, because we know that market rent is not something that, people can afford here in Toronto, which is around like $1,700 for a 1-bedroom. Right.
Yeah,
and so,
we're right up there with you. Trust me.
Yeah.
Yes. Some of the people can comment on. We're just recently rated one of the 3rd most expensive cities in North America compared to incomes. So,
wow.
Huge challenge here. We've seen a massive surge in our rentals across the board, similar. And gentrification is a huge contentious issue. So from the HCBN's perspective, we have been looking very much at seeing inclusionary zoning as an essential part of the transit-oriented corridor that's being built with the LRT, and the need for transit-oriented development and inclusionary to be included as part of a potential community benefit. Although that's not a negotiation with Metrolinx, that's with the city of Hamilton for this project. But it's something that needs to happen along that line to make that affordable housing piece happen, as these these towers continue to be built right along the transit line, and making sure that we're seeing 20%, 10%, whatever is possible. But I would certainly love to see a number higher. Was there any firm targets set in your inclusionary zoning bylaw conversations with Toronto?
The policy is not set yet. I think City Council will be voting on it, I think, in September. I think they were supposed to come up this summer, but they've delayed it a little bit into September now. But the demands that we put forward, I think, we've been working closely with organizations like Acorn, who have been really leading on some of the housing files and work related to affordable housing. And I know their demands has been, 20 to 30% of deep, affordable housing, which is rent geared to income.
Okay, so let me cycle back a little bit to what were some of the challenges you and the TCBN encountered in your conversations with Metrolinx, and what to learn from TCBN's experiences?
Well, there's definitely been a lot of learnings from our work with Metrolinx. I would say community engagement is continuous. From the pre-planning, development to implementation to what comes after these LRT investments, and that's something that we've really seen, how the transit infrastructure really accelerates development along the corridor. right? And so, we realize how important it is to have that conversation with the community, on an ongoing basis in terms of, as the community changes, how do we make sure that the community is involved in the process and that we're really informing and really understanding of what's happening and really informing, the community's vision in terms of what we want to see along the corridor. And so I would say that's one big piece is continuous community engagement, because
would it be fair to say then that community consultation and community benefits don't end with the project, and that might be something you guys are starting to learn?
Yeah, because once the project is done, like along the corridor, we're seeing tons of development coming forward now, right? And so, how does the community involved in those developments? A lot of it is private development, but some of it is also publicly owned land, right? And so, how do we ensure that those public lands are prioritized for the greatest public use? And so, that's a conversation that we continue to have on the private development front. Really making sure that there are opportunities for good jobs within the local community, and really preserving employment lands, along in some of these areas. Making sure that there's deep affordability, making sure that there's community spaces, community services and facilities being created, making sure that some of the environmental impacts are mitigated or or eliminated from some of the proposals that are coming forward. How do we make sure that some of these projects are actually leading on environmental design, and development, which is an important area of focus right now. And so, a lot of our work right now is really focused along the corridor. On the east side of Eglinton, Golden Mile. It used to be a bunch of retail and shopping centers. There's like a Walmart, there's a Loblaws, there's a shopping mall there. All of that's being redeveloped into condos. There's I think 11 redevelopment applications. On the other side, more residential neighborhood in Mount Dennis, but there's also significant development applications. I think there's at least 3 or 4 that have already come in, and these are large-scale, multi-tower, 45-story, type condos, right? And so, it's really important that you anticipate that type of development and density coming into the community, and really making sure that the community is really involved and prepared to really engage and to really push back, against potential harms that may be coming into the community, and really present your vision in terms of what is the community's vision. And I would actually, that's my second recommendation, is be proactive in setting demands and raising concerns. Don't wait for Metrolinx to come to the table. Don't wait for the government to come to the table. Don't wait for the developer to come to the table. Use through your community engagement, be proactive in setting your demands, your priorities, and you really use that as a conversation starter, as a negotiating starter, which can be really effective. Engage as early as possible, whether it's with Metrolinx on these on the LRT, or with Metrolinx in terms of how their public land will be offloaded in the future. I think being able to engage as early as possible in development process, can really help to shape what comes out. And so early engagement is really important, and really leverage your public pressure, right? So TCBN, we're at the table. We can only say so much. We can only advocate so much. But what we have is a strong network of folks who support our work. We have a strong network members who are really supportive of the work that we do. And so really leveraging our network and our supporters to really, push, and advocate when those moments may arise in negotiations, which is really important. So how do you build that out and get folks involved is another, important recommendation. And so, I would say those are probably some of the more important learnings that we've had.
Let me just touch briefly on what, talking specifically about community benefits gains. Obviously, community benefits can't be a catch-all. There are limits, upward limits of how much money developers can pay. But what are some gains you really wish you had gotten? And then what are those impossible gains you've heard from residents where you're just like, I in a million years, that'd be great. But I want to first start on what are the ones you really wish you had gotten that you'd heard from residents that you missed maybe a project, that we can start kind of framing our basis when we're asking people to really imagine the Hamilton LRT project. because we've talked about jobs, we've talked about the affordable housing piece, inclusionary zoning. I mean, those are non-starters right out of the gate. Environment concerns should be top of mind, but and of course the employment piece. But what are some things that you heard during your conversations that Hamilton should start speaking about that you guys just didn't get in your project that you think are realistic?
Yeah, I would say one that was really like kind of was something that I think we could have done a better job with some of the engagement with businesses along the corridor who were severely impacted by construction. And so, an area like Little Jamaica, where there's a lot of, small businesses, Caribbean-owned businesses, they've been devastated by the construction activity of the Eglinton Crosstown Lrt. And I think one of the things that, if we could go back, I think would really make sure that Metrolinx had, some sort of fund or some sort of resources available to really compensate, some of these businesses that, would be impacted by the construction activity. Because, if folks can't, if it's really hard to get to an area like that by transit, because there's, poor transit infrastructure, and then there's a lot of traffic because of the construction, you're probably not going to go to that area. To drive in, there's so much traffic and no parking at all, right? And I know, like, throughout the process, the city was offering free parking and some of the other things to, help to get people to support those businesses. But I think at the very core, I think, really making sure that, because it should be part of the overall project cost, in terms of impacts, to businesses along the corridor. And, that should have been something that was earmarked in terms of compensation for any lost revenues for businesses along the corridor.
That's really good advice, and something we've been working with our part, the BIN Chamber, to start having those conversations with Metrolinx years ago, based a bit on some of that experiences, business support, getting locals to shop there, and how we can really, from a resident side, not from the Metrolinx side, but from a resident side, how residents and how communities can support these businesses in terms of shop local campaigns and getting people out there, engaging in crawls. We had looked at ideas around festivals on the weekends when there's no traffic because the road's up. How can we encourage, bringing bodies into these areas for businesses? But actual money from Metrolinx is probably something that we should work with our partners on seeing that's available. So what do you think is impossible, or do you think that the sky's the moon? I like to think that tell everybody to put everything on the table with community benefits and let's see what we can get. But you've been doing this a while. What do you think is probably just a non-starter?
Yeah, I wouldn't say like there's anything that's a non-starter. I think like as you develop your demands, I think it's definitely, you can put it forward, and then, I think the conversation starts from there, right? And, there were a lot of things that very early on that Metrolinx had come forward and said that was impossible, like in terms of the backup power generator. They said that, we are set on this location, this is what we're coming forward with. But it was actually the community that went off and actually looked and offered solutions and alternatives, right? Which is also something to think about, if you are coming into some of those, if you're coming into some of those challenges. And so, yeah, I would say like there's nothing that's impossible. I think as you move forward in the process, there might be things that just may be out of scope or just impossible, or the lack of resources. But yeah, I think like, yeah, like I don't think like anything is impossible. I think like there may be a lot of challenges or barriers or hurdles that you may have to get through. But I think like, if you're able to have an open and transparent and conversation with whoever you're negotiating with, whoever you're engaging with, but also, be proactive in kind of coming up with solutions or alternatives, in terms of, if this thing may not work, or if this demand has come forward and, they've responded and said, this is impossible, is there an example maybe somewhere else in the world, in another jurisdiction that you can maybe point to say, hey, this is not impossible, it's been done before, but this is XYZ in terms of what you need to get there, right? You may need to bring.
You gave us a great example of that in the beginning, which was going to be the backup generator for
exactly.
that was going to use fossil fuels, and some environmental groups pushed forward and pushed back against that, and it became a battery facility instead that wouldn't generate any fossil fuels. And so that took alternative ideas from the community and pushback from the community to support your organization in getting that gain.
Yeah, and that idea actually was a new technology that was being developed in Europe, actually. And so they had connected with a bunch of environmentalists in Europe that were doing work related to this new sort of concept of an electric powered backup generator, which was relatively new, a little bit more costly, but you know, it really addressed some of the potential environmental impacts that was, you know, the community was really concerned about.
All right. Well, I hope people have taken heart. We had a few quick questions pop in that I'm going to get to in a few moments. I just wanted to ask you. I mentioned it a lot. Our LRT project has had a lot of contention. It's been a political football. It's been a bit divisive in the city in terms of people fully understanding the benefits to community, especially from things like community benefit employment and things like that. Did you have any of that contention in your projects? And I know community benefits organizations are supposed to be a little bit neutral, only kind of stepping in once the projects are fully approved. But did you guys deal with any contention in your light rail projects?
Yeah, I would say, like, you know, lots of contention, you know, when it comes to the projects, and so I would say, like, the design of the projects is very early on, I think, is always a contentious issue. You know, we always have the debate, you know, whether it's above ground, underground, also, like, you know, the selection of some of the stations or facilities that Metrolinx kind of comes forward with in terms of their design. You know, environmental impacts and neighborhood improvements always been, you know, something that's been contentious. You know, but I think for TCBN, I think, like, you know, being very close into communities, really doing a lot of that engagement. I think what we can do is really, although, like, we can't really, that's not within our scope of community benefits. I think what we can do is create a platform for these type of issues to be brought forward to Metrolinx. Yeah, like, these are, you know, multi-billion-dollar projects that are going to create a lot of change in neighborhoods, you know, in communities, you know, in our city, and so, you know, as communities really understand, you know, what that change is going to look like in their communities, and what potential harms that, you know, these projects may come forward with. It's really important to for those type of issues to really be addressed. And TCBN, we relatively don't get ourselves really involved in some of those early on contentious issues related to design, but we're very supportive in being able to bring some of those, you know, asks or concerns to the table to Metrolinx, and hopefully, you know, have them addressed. And so, yeah, I would say, like, you know, that's kind of how we've been able to navigate, you know, through you know, some of these, you know, more contentious issues that may arise, you know, during the planning, but also during the project as well, right? You know, a lot of issues that come from the local level, and also, you know, making sure that, you know, these are type of, you know, they're the spaces as well for communities to really engage with Metrolinx related to some of those issues related to design and construction and planning. And so, a good practice that we've had here are local advisory committees. So, you know, related to in different neighborhoods or near some of the stations, there are, you know, specific local advisory committees, you know, that are set up with Metrolinx and community groups where some of these different contentious issues can be addressed directly.
All right, well, that is definitely something that we will be actively pursuing with Metrolinx to make sure goes on here. How much of a role did the City of Toronto play in your community benefits negotiations with Metrolinx? Were they a partner? What was your relationship? Were they helpful? Did they bring extras to the table? How did that relationship play out? Early on, we were sitting down with both the city and Metrolinx as kind of equal partners to try and work on the best solution. So how did it unfold in Toronto?
Yeah, I would say, like, the city has definitely been involved, you know, when it comes to the transit planning. I know they've worked very closely with Metrolinx, and so we've also seen the city as a direct opportunity for engagement, you know, when it came to any issues or concerns or challenges. I would say more broadly, the city was very supportive of the asks related to community benefits. I think it was a year before the community benefits conversation came up, where the poverty reduction strategy was passed at the City of Toronto. And as part of the poverty reduction strategy, they did identify public infrastructure and different development projects as a good opportunity to create good jobs in the city through community benefit agreements and social procurement. And so, through that lens, I think the city was very supportive to make sure that, with these investments coming into the community, that there would be commitments for community benefits. And we had done a lot of engagement with like some of the local city councilors along the lines to get their support, and they were very supportive and really bought into the concept of community benefit agreements and really wanting to see people in their communities really get good job opportunities from these investments and projects.
All right, well that is good. So what are some CBA wins that you've had with the City of Toronto itself? Here in Hamilton, we have struck, but it hasn't met yet, a community benefits subcommittee that's supposed to advise our city council and our city councilors on what potential CBAs could look like for the City of Hamilton. And I know you've had two successes in Toronto, one of them being a social procurement policy that the City of Toronto implemented. So maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about what social procurement is and that policy in Toronto. And because that was kind of a pretty good gain from a few years ago for you guys with the city itself, not related to light rail transit. And then, of course, your community benefits wins with the City of Toronto.
Yeah, so with the social procurement policy that was passed in 2017, that was a policy that really looked internally. So it was more of an internal sort of city objective to really leverage, a lot of the purchasing that the city does. As you know, like governments do a lot of purchasing when it comes to goods and services. I think Toronto, we spend about $3 billion a year on purchasing goods and services directly. And that's lots of opportunities, right? And we know that, so through social procurement, really the focus is like workforce development. And so, if there is someone that's purchasing, or if the city is purchasing some, a project, if the city is purchasing any goods and services, how could they make sure that those contractors are really supporting the workforce development programs around like local hiring and equity hiring? So that's one focus. And then the second focus is around like supply chain diversity, right? So how does the city open up their purchasing so that more medium-sized and smaller-sized businesses can bid on? Because a lot of times some of these contracts are really bundled up. And then also making sure that diverse-owned businesses can also get supported through some of these procurement opportunities. And so it kind of looks at those three different areas: workforce development, accessibility for smaller and medium-sized enterprises, and then also supply chain diversity with supporting diverse-owned businesses to really get some of those opportunities when it comes to public city purchasing of goods and services. So the policy was passed in 2017. There's definitely been a lot of learning from that, in terms of making sure that there's adequate resources at the city, getting the adequate staffing, resources to help support the program. There's been a lot of work in terms of having all these different divisions and agencies and corporations of the city also better understand social procurement and how they can actually implement them through their processes. So there's also been like sort of that whole internal learning sort of phase that's kind of gone on. And I would say there's a lot more work to do. I think seeing from some of the progress reports that we've received, some of the targets that the city had initially set have not been met, which is unfortunate. But, we continue to make recommendations. We continue to see, engage with our networks and organizations and groups to really, ensure that, they're involved in some of the city purchasing opportunities and events that may come up. I think the pandemic has also created a lot of challenges as well the last couple of years, but definitely lots of work to do there. And then in the community benefits framework policy that was passed in 2019, that focuses on any area where the city purchases or where they build or finance. So any projects where the city is leading on development. So if the city is building a new community center or they're building a new They do a lot of sort of public city projects, like a new childcare center. Any of those projects over $5 million, there is a workforce development component. So there is a requirement that whoever receives that contract needs to commit to certain workforce development targets as well as social procurement targets. And then also where there's incentives. So we have a development incentive program here in Toronto that provides tax incentives to developers who are building. These are usually within the private development space. And usually the city offers tax breaks to some of these developments. And so we've been really active in pushing the city to say that, if you're going to be giving up some of these tax breaks, there must be some sort of benefits that are coming into the community, and sort of really leveraging that program to really engage with some of these developers. A lot of them are on the private side to ensure that they're also making commitments different to a wide range of community benefit options that the city presents to them.
Well, thank you very much. We may have to have you back to talk more about that in our own community benefits subcommittee and what gains it might have. I've got one question that's off topic, but I want to take it because we're almost out of time, but I want to give it a few here. So I'll just put it up here. So we had Carrie Porter asks, have you seen any successes with CBAs on private developments on private property? If yes, what are the keys to successful private projects that don't include any public infrastructure or money from the government? So I wanted to talk about a bit about this. I know this has happened in other jurisdictions. I'm not aware of it happening in Ontario personally, but I have heard of it, and it is something that a lot of people have been talking about with CBAs. I also wanted to mention, we were talking about the LRT here in Hamilton and inclusionary zoning along the transit-oriented corridor, that would be forcing private developers to build some measure of affordable housing in their developments. But can you touch on this and what TCBN's perspective is? It's one of the questions we didn't cover, and I thought it stood out. So.
Yeah, the one experience that we've had with private development was the one I spoke about early on, which was the Casino Woodbine expansion project, which is a private developer and private development project. We did have some leverage because there were specific outcomes, community benefit outcomes, like local hiring, local and equity hiring, social procurement, ensuring that there was, investments into things like community spaces. For the project that City Council had approved. So the City Council had approved certain conditions to approval of the facility. It didn't say that the developer had to enter into a CBA. It just said that these are the following conditions that you would have to meet. But from our experience was, I would say that was probably our biggest campaign that we had launched in terms of our advocacy at the community level. In Rexdale, we launched a campaign called Rexdale Rising that had the endorsement of 30 local organizations and community groups. We worked with our partners at Acorn to do a huge petition drive, and so really getting into the community, knocking on doors, going to the different shopping malls and public spaces on the weekends, engaging with people, getting people to sign on to the petition. We had, people who signed on the petition, start making calls to the developer because that was one of the biggest challenges that we had faced was the developer was not interested in a CBA. They were saying that, oh, we have all these other facilities across Canada that we already do this local and equity hiring. We're committed to doing all of that, but very resistant to actually signing on to a CBA. So, making calls directly to their lines and asking for them to commit to a CBA. Engaging with our city councilors, with, the Toronto mayor. The local city councilor at the time was Michael Ford, which created another big challenge because he wasn't supportive of the community's demands for CBA. And so we had to, put pressure on the Toronto's mayor, as well as other local city councilors. And then also, I think one of the other areas that we also did was, do some sort of advocacy related to the company. We understood that one of the big partners for the project was Brookfield, and they're a publicly traded company. And when we went onto their website and we did a bunch of research, we found out they had a bunch of environmental, social, and governance goals that they had as a corporation. And when the company did not want to negotiate with us, we sent letters, to Brookfield and all the financing partners saying that, this is how Great Canadian Gaming, who was a developer who was working, negotiating with us. And we were saying, like, is this how, you engage with communities when it comes to your projects? Really, raising concerns, to some of their executives. And so we did a lot of different advocacy strategies, to put pressure on the company to get them to actually secure the CBA. And so that's our only experience with a private development project. We have been somewhat involved with new developments here in Toronto that are private developments, and like communities wanting to say, like, how through a CBA that we can secure affordable housing, which has been a big need. And so, that's an area that we continue to kind of focus on, because, one of the challenges is that, for private development, it follows a really specific planning process that is informed by the Provincial Planning Act and your official planning act at the city. But it doesn't limit. But I would say that these type of campaigns, whether they result in an actual formal CBA or any other type of agreement, because one of the other things that we've seen as well is that there's other type of agreements that can be formed from this type of community advocacy. One of the areas that we've been really supportive of is community land trusts, who have been really focused on taking on purchasing, public property or private property and bringing it into community control. And, we've been, that's an area, where the city has, through Section 37, really leveraged some of the money that they have, to invest in some of these community land trusts to be able to purchase, some of these properties and stuff like that. And so it may not be a specific CBA, but, we've been very supportive of other type of agreements or MOUs or things that can ensure that developers commit to, community benefit outcomes, which we know are very important.
Well, I appreciate your time. I want to be mindful of it, especially considering it's such a beautiful Saturday. So I hope to have you back and other members from the TCBN as the project hopefully reaches its final hurdle at City Council, which is final council approval to move forward. And we begin our own community conversations here at the HCBN, reaching out to members, hopefully in a less pandemic future, which obviously puts a little bit of a damper on community engagement, but we are hoping to restart all of our community conversations and start hearing from residents on what a Made in Hamilton community benefits agreement can look like and what gains we can build on based on what Toronto's had. So thank you so much, Kumsa. I really appreciate your time, and you've been awesome. I look forward to having you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's been really inspiring to follow the work that you're leading in Hamilton. I wish you all the best, in your continued advocacy, and, to also learn from, what's working and what's not, and to really, bring back some of the learnings back to Toronto as well, because I think there's so much to learn, I think, on both of our ends.
Thank you again for being here. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This will be available for rebroadcast on our YouTube channel at the HCBN YouTube channel, as well as on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks, everyone, and have a great afternoon.